Hello and welcome everyone, this is Calebovitsch coming to you with the third episode of the Oldhim trilogy on how to draft him in the Tales of Aria draft format for Flesh and Blood. Oh my goodness, that's a long title, let me get it shorter. Anyway, today I would like to show you a couple of decklist examples. These are theoretical draft decklists that I've built to showcase some of the aspects, numbers, proportions, etc. But let's start with some numbers. And that is the power base, and even before the power base, the card number in your deck. I come from a long line of draft games from Magic the Gathering, Eternal, and a lot of other ones. And the first rule that I've said out and typed out and recorded some videos on it time and time again in those games was play as few cards as you can in your deck. So that was like 40 in Magic, 45 in Eternal, etc, etc. In Flesh and Blood it is a bit different, because fatigue works differently here, especially if you want to play a hero that, for who one of the game plans is actually fatigue. So if you are going for Oldhim, if you are going for this fella, fatigue is actually one of your game plans, especially against Lexi, sometimes against Briar, sometimes against the Mirror. Okay? So it is actually a decent idea to, while retaining obviously your blue to yellow to red parity, your 3 defense to non-3 defense ratio, etc, etc. It is really decent to go to 32, 33, maybe even 35 cards, especially in the mirror match. But when it comes to proportions for a 30 card deck, the numbers go as follows. 2 most important factors for your deck are blue pitch cards, i.e. cards that give you 3 resources if you send them to the pitch zone, and elemental cards. Elemental cards not for the fusion, but for your defense reaction, preventing 2 damage or sending a card from the opponent's hand to the top of their deck. That summed up means that the best card that you can have in your deck is a blue earth card, more often than not. Which card? It doesn't matter. So your power base starts with blue earth, then it goes through blue ice, and then it finishes up with blue elemental guardian, and maybe a few blue elementals, but you usually don't want these. You are aiming to have at least 15 blue cards in a 30 card deck, which means at least half of your deck needs to be blue. You don't want those 4 red turns, because you can only statically defend for 2 or for 3 with each card, and your advantage as Oldhim, it comes from doing more than that, from also pitching for this ability of swinging back with Titan's Fist, or sending back for some attacks for 6 or 7 or 8 or 10. Okay? Sometimes, well, there is an example of when you have deep blue, then you can go slightly lower on those blue cards, but I wouldn't skimp on them anyway. It is just a protection against having a 4 red turn or 4 non-blue turn, in other words. How many elemental cards do you need? Well, Autumn's Touch being and Winter's Grasp being the outliers, because they also can defend for 3. You kind of want as many blues as possible, or red earth attacks for 7 as possible. As for the other ones, they can stay, they can go, because the Guardian cards just block for 3, and that is what they're here for more often than not. You don't specifically need those elemental cards for fusions, unless some combos in your deck say so, for example, Weave Ices. Or, well, it's good to have a couple of ice cards in your deck alongside those Glacial Footsteps to make them dominate, to give that attack dominate. But once again, you're using those elemental cards mostly for the ability and not for the fusion. You don't need many specific buffs unless you are playing Thumps. If you are playing Thumps, then Crackerjacks is having at least one is really good, like 1 Cracker Jacks to 2 Thump, which means you can use 1 Thump as resources for Titan's Fist, or you can use 1 Thump with Cracker Jacks and the other one just to block for 3. So there's not a lot of proportions that you want for Oldhim. So let me just show you the deck lists of how they work. Okay, so I have 2 example deck lists. Let me first start off with the one that I think is weaker. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay. Equipment, deep blue. Blue card count, 3, 7, 9, 13. This is on the lower side. If I didn't have deep blue here, I would be saying 0 or 1 wins, probably because you don't have enough blue cards in this deck. The deep blue comes in for the gap of those 2 missing blue cards, but that's about it. Overall, 30 cards, so we're not planning to going into fatigue matches in the mirror more often than not. Also, this is more icy than earthy, but you do have 2 red Biting Gales, and these can come really handy with the fusion. I mean, Biting Gale without the fusion, you have to pay 2 to defense reaction block for 4, and that's it. And that is really underwhelming unless you are strictly putting them in the arsenal, and this is where their place is more often than not. These attacks don't matter that much. You're playing them as defense cards. You're not playing them as attacks. For example, Snow Under, blue, attacks for 5, costs 3. Is it better to pitch 3 and attack for 5 with this, or is it better to pitch blue and attack with your Titan's Fist for 4? It's only 1 point damage worth of difference, so unless your opponent is exactly at 5 or at 2 for those breakpoints where they have to use an additional card to not die, it's much better to leave this card in your deck, because this card represents 3 life. Because it blocks for 3. It's that simple. At least when you're playing Oldhim. Autumn's Touch and Break Ground are your only earth cards, so sometimes you need to pitch in Evergreen and something else to use the damage prevention. You would want usually more earth cards and more blue earth cards in this deck. Double Polar Blast, it doesn't do that much. Those Polar Blasts and so Tomorrows don't do that much in Oldhim decks, in my opinion. You do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-ish big attacks. Those 3 Glacial Footsteps blue here kind of help. But the resource base here is low. The reaction synergies are quite low. Your defense reactions are just 2 red Biting Gales, so that is rather mediocre. Oh, and I forgot these 3 are also big attacks. So overall, I would think this deck would go probably around 1 win unless it's all versus Briar. Then it would just fall apart, plain and simple. But let me show you a deck that I consider to be slightly better, at least on a theoretical basis. Okay, this is theoretical deck number 2. So, head count. 5, 9, 14, 16. 16 blues. Overall, this deck has 17, 19, 22, 25, 29, 32 cards. So you are ready for the long game, for the long play. Okay? Defense-wise, 5 blue earth cards, which means you will be using a defense reaction every other turn, unless you want to pitch in these and these. You have 2 attacks for 7 over here, so, and they block for 3 as well, which is really good. you have 2 thumps. For that, you are running, I forgot to put it here, you are running the Cracker Jacks, so you're already fine here. Sorry, 2 thumps, 3rd thump over here. But aside from those, you are running 2 red Strength of Sequoia and 2 blue Emerging Avalanches. Even an Earthlore Surge and an Icequake, which means those thumps can connect with the added bonus of having Dominate, and if this hits a hero, they discard a card. You also have 2 Turn Timbers, which I consider to be much better than Biting Gales, because you don't have to fuse them. They already block for 4, 5, or 6, so this red one blocks for 6. When it's Earth Fuse, it blocks for 8, so it blocks almost all incoming attacks, whether they have Dominate or not. And even if you still have Summerwood Shelter, the Earth instant that says target defending Earth or Elemental action card gets +4 defense. So you cannot buff these. Remember, you cannot buff the Ice cards, but the Earth cards and the Guardian cards, aside from Thump, you also cannot buff Thumps with this, because they're just Guardian, they're not Elemental. But most of this deck, 3 Thumps, 3 of these, so 25 out of 31 cards other than Summerwood Shelter you can buff. So that's really good. And your plan here is, oh, and another Strength of Sequoia for those thumps. So 5, 6, 7, and Cracker Jack. So you're really set up for those thumps. You could play even, I would say, 2 more thumps in this deck, whatever their color. I would play another thump over the Entangle. That would be really good, because you have the option of going for that. And I could maybe go 1 Emerging Avalanche or Strength of Sequoia lower, instead going for another one here or here. But in general, what you are doing here is, well, blocking a lot. Obviously, you have your pivot turns with thumps. You have your setup turns with Strength of Sequoia. But it's usually good to have an attack in your arsenal when you are playing these, because there's nothing worse like setting up a red Strength of Sequoia or Emerging Avalanche and then drawing and not having a Guardian attack. Also remember, these are only for Guardian attacks, so they don't work for Autumn's Touch, Break Ground, or Icy Encounter, or any of these. And yes, the proportions here are solid. You want a lot of blue cards, you want a lot of good red attacks, you want a lot of good defense here and here when it comes to the defense reaction ability. So yes, if I have this deck, I'm thinking more in the line of 2 or 3 wins on a draft pod instead of the 0-1 with the previous deck. But this is just theory. Obviously, it also depends on the rest of your pod, on your matchups. Like there could be that one insane Ice Lexi player that just runs over you and their name is Caleb. Or there could be the insane Briar 0 cost go again played by a single player or a dual player. So yeah, that is also what is great about the draft format. Because every pod is different. It matters what deck you have, but it also matters what cards were opened, what cards were in the whole pool for 8 people, or fewer or more, depends on how you want to draft it. You can, for example, be set up against someone who has 2 legendaries. I mean, I haven't seen that, but still, like, you can have an insane deck, but someone can have an even better deck. Or you could just have a mediocre deck and run everyone through because, for example, there were 6 Briar players, 1 Lexi player for which you have an auto win, and you're the only Oldhim player. So, yeah. Okay. This is going to be it for the Oldhim Trilogy Draft Series. I hope you did enjoy the videos, and they are going to bring you a lot of benefits for your drafting future. And remember, open up that legendary and double sleeve it as soon as you see it. And until then, Calebovitsch out.